Matthew, background from the John MacArthur Study Bible. Matthew means gift of the Lord, and the other name of Levi, the tax collector, who left everything to follow Jesus. Matthew is one of the 12 apostles. Let's see. His sinful past, tax collector, again, that's basically seen as a traitor to the Jewish people. They worked for the Romans, who was their conquerors, and also often charged higher. They could keep whatever profit they made by charging higher than whatever Rome asked them to collect. Let's see. It's written at an early date, prior to the destruction of AD 70. I believe the Gospel of Mark was written first, then the Gospel of Matthew. It's written to Jews. You see it evidently because the opening genealogy, which is important to Jews. And let's see. Yeah, this Gospel is quoted more than 60 times from Old Testament prophetic passages, emphasizing how Christ is the fulfillment of all those promises. And Matthew usually cites Jewish customs without explaining them. He calls Christ the Son of David, which is an important messianic term to Jews. And he says the kingdom of heaven, whereas the other Gospels speak of it as the kingdom of God. This is to guard Jewish sensibilities in the same way. They do not say God's name today, Yahweh. They say Adonai. Matthew's use of Greek may suggest he was writing as a Palestinian Jew to Hellenistic Jews elsewhere. He was an eyewitness. He was one of the 12 apostles. And his purpose to demonstrate that Jesus is the Jewish nation's long-awaited Messiah. He quotes the Old Testament all over the gospel to show how it ties into their scriptures. Some themes showing that Jesus is the Messiah, the King of the Jews. The opening genealogy shows Jesus' credentials in that. It records 5 major discourses in this book. The Sermon on the Mount, chapters 5 to 7, the commissioning of the apostles, chapter 10, the parables about the kingdom, chapter 13, a discourse about the childlikeness of the believer, chapter 18, and the discourse on his second coming, chapter 24 to 25. The conflict between Christ and Phariseeism. He also mentions the Sadducees a lot. It's a group that did not believe in the resurrection. And we see a lot, the attacks against Jesus are portrayed vividly in this gospel, from the flight to Egypt to the cross. He was rejected, and Matthew is filled with the rejection of Christ. So an outline of this book, let's see how many points there are. 7 main points. I'll go ahead and read them. Point number 1, the prologue, the King's Advent, which means the King's coming. Chapter 1 to chapter 4, verse 25. Point number 2, the King's authority, chapter 5 to chapter 9. And then point number 3, the King's agenda, chapter 10 to chapter 12. Point number 4, the King's adversaries, chapter 13 to chapter 17. Point number 5, the King's administration, chapter 18 to chapter 23. Point number 6, the King's atonement, chapter 24 to chapter 28. And finally, point 7, the epilogue, the King's assignment, chapter 28, the Great Commission.